Hello class, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about chapter 10 in our book, and for right now, specifically the loan class. In your online textbook, you should find the video note for the loan class. And in this video note, the speaker does an excellent job of walking you through the code to create the class. I've followed along and I've created my code, and here's my loan class. And you can see I start out with my public class name, the private variables that are owned by this class, then my default constructor where I'm not expecting any parameters to be passed, and I'm going to set up some default values for my loan, then the loan constructor that allows for multiple parameter values to be passed in so that when we establish this instance of a loan, it has specific settings. After that, we have all our accessor and mutators or getters and setters coded, and these are the ways that we expose our classes, variables, our fields to people using our class. So we're not going to let them access the interest rate field directly. We're going to let them pass us, a parameter when they establish a loan of what that interest rate is going to be, and then we're going to let them get it from us, and then we're going to let them update it. But if they update it, they have to go through our set method so that we can make sure that their data is valid. In some instances, we might do more code in a setter or a mutator because we are updating data and we're going to make sure that we're doing a valid update. So this allows our class to control our data as well as hide the details of the information from our users, one of the main components of object-oriented programming. Now I continue on with our getters and setters. Then we have some actual action methods, like one that does some calculations to return the monthly payment. Again, another calculation to get the total payment. Note that it calls our get monthly payment to make sure that it's got valid data. And finally, a getter to return the loan date. Now in my test class, I haven't created the extensive test class that they created in the video. We will. But first, I just wanted to create a very basic tester. So anytime we create a class, we're probably going to create an external tester class to go along with it. If I were submitting these in Hypergrade, I would upload both of these .java files to Hypergrade, and then I would be able to test my application in Hypergrade just the same as if I only had one .java file. So we want two separate files, one for our loan class code and one for our tester class code. And in our tester class, first thing we're going to do is create an instance of our loan object. So that's called instantiating an instance. And when I do that for this loan, I'm going to use our no parameter constructor, unlike our book, because I just want to see what happens if I create a loan without passing any data, just the simplest way I can. And then I'm going to output the information about the loan in the same format as our book outputs the information from their loan. We're just creating a loan a little bit differently. I named my loan, where our book named it loan. That's a lot of loans, right? We got a loan data type created by our class, then our actual object instance of our loan, and then we have to say, hey, yeah, I want this to be created. It's a new instance of my loan data type class. All right, so I'm going to run this and let you see the output. Again, very simple loan. It's using our defaults. And if we use our defaults, we come up with our loan being created right now, what the monthly payment is, and what the total payment is over the life of the loan. So we may come back and update this tester to include the input statements to prompt the user for input, or I may just let you do that on your own because this default loan is working well enough for me to be a valid tester. What I wanted to show you is how to use the debugger in Eclipse with our loan object so that you can step through the code and see what's going on. So it's awesome and great to copy code out of the book. It's a wonderful practice for you, but you can use some additional tools to help you even more. and one of those is the debugger. Now when we're using Eclipse, the debugger is available with the little debug icon, or little bug, and if you drew the drop down, you'll see that I can set up my test loan class for debugging, and then I can run it and get some wonderful debug information. But I want to actually set a breakpoint in my code so that the debugger makes my code stop and lets me step through the information to see what's going on. So there's lots of ways in Eclipse that I can set a breakpoint. I like the easy way where I just come over and I want to stop executing my Java code at this line of code so that I can step through it and see what happens when I create an instance of my loan object. So I'm going to come over here to this left blue bar on this line, and I'm going to click there, click, come on, to create a little dot. I had to double click, sorry. So when I double click now, I've set a breakpoint at this location in my code. There are other things I could do. I could choose the project menu and, the run menu and toggle a breakpoint on and off. I can use some keystrokes. So all of these different things will let me do that. But once I've got my breakpoint set, I'm going to see this blue dot showing up in this bar on the right hand side of my IDE. Now I'm going to go ahead and run. And at this point, I should get some messages from Eclipse. What am I doing? It's not running for me. I'm going to debug it. How about this? Debug as Java application. There we go. Now, when I do that, it says, okay, if you want to debug this, we're going to switch into the debug perspective. This is a different view. And yes, I want to open this perspective now. Now, notice how our IDE interface has changed. And up here, we see a debug menu that's showing us where exactly we are in our code. We have our continue and stop buttons there. This window is very important. It's showing us all of the variables in our code and what their values are. Right now, the only variable I have are the args value that was part of my main declaration, which is not something that we're using yet at this point, so it doesn't really mean a lot to me. But as I step through my code, I'm going to see additional variables and their values show up here. Now in this window, I see the actual source code that's being executed. The line of code that we're waiting to execute right now is highlighted in green. I can see some additional outline information about which pieces of source code I'm executing over here, and down at the bottom is my console for my input and my output. Now I am stopped at my statement that's going to create a new loan object, and I'd like to step through the code and see how a new loan object is created. So on my debug menu, I see that I have an option that says step into, and I can use the F5 key to do that, or I can click this icon. So I will step into my code, and we see first thing that we're in now our loan class, and we are in the default constructor, because when I created a loan, I passed no parameters, so it's executing the default constructor. And remember that our default constructor is saying, hey, for this instance of the loan, I'm going to use these values to build my loan object. Well, now what's going to happen? I'm going to go ahead and step into again and see that indeed it uses the full loan constructor now with the parameters, interest rate, number of years, and loan amount, to build the loan object. And we can see now that we have our parameter values up here in our variables. Now these parameters are named in this class the same as our field names. They don't have to be. They could be something else, because no matter what we do, we have to use them to actually set our class level variables equal to the value that's contained in this parameter data. So for example, my annual interest rate is 2.5, the parameter. If I expand my loan, which is of course this, I see that right now my annual interest rate is 0, my loan amount is 0, my loan date is null. because I used that default constructor, so I don't have any of that data yet in my loan. But I see that I have these parameter values set right now that I passed in to this second loan constructor that's going to use the parameters to build. So let me continue stepping. And now this line of code is going to set the annual interest rate in the class level loan to the value passed by the annual interest rate parameter into our constructor, which is of course the value that our default constructor placed into the parentheses to pass into it. So 2.5. So I'm going to continue and step on through. Now as I look up at my variables, I should see that now my annual interest rate is indeed set. This last line of code set that in this loan. So in this loan, my annual interest rate variable now has a value, and it's the value that was passed into the constructor. I'm going to continue on. Now my number of years will be set to the value that was passed in, and my loan amount. And lastly, my loan date will be set to a new date of like now. Now you can see that the system is sitting at the curly brace that closes this constructor. This object has been constructed. So I'm going to continue stepping. And again, I'm back to the curly brace of our default constructor that called the constructor that had parameter values to update our loan. So I'm going to continue on. And now I'm back to my tester. So I have finished constructing my loan object. I have completed executing everything in this line of code. In this line of code, I used the default constructor to build an instance of a loan. That default constructor called the other constructor that expected parameter values to update all of the values of the loan that had been constructed. Now I'm going to continue on, stepping into my code. And I go to my printf statement, and I see that I am going to output all this wonderful information about my loan. Remember now I could still expand the variables area and see what all the values are for my loan, the instance of the loan object that I created. Notice how when we were looking at the variables, when we were inside the loan class object, our object was called this. Now that we've left our class, and we're back to our calling method, it is called myLoan, the name that we gave it in this code. So we can see that in our variables information, we use that this keyword within the class to refer to this instance of the object. But of course, outside of the class, we give the object its own name, and that's how we refer to it. So in myLoan, I'm going to get the loan date, the monthly payment, that other information, and I'm going to output that to the console. So I'll go ahead and continue, and we can see each line is calling back to our class. So when I say I want to get the loan date, indeed it's executing the getLoanDate method in my loan class, which returns the loan date. I'm going to continue stepping through. Now we're going to go ahead and turn that into a string, and notice that the Eclipse compiler was smart enough to know that we didn't want to see all that system code associated with the toString method. So there are options that you can use to change those settings, but for now we just can assume that it did what it needed to do to make that date into a string. Now we're going to execute our getMonthlyPayment method. Again, it's going to come over and use our class's code to execute this method. We're going to set up our double variable to calculate the interest rate and then the monthly payment. We can look at all of the different variable values as we do that calculation so that we can become math wizards also and know what's going on there. And finally, we're going to return that monthly payment amount to our caller, which we're still in that printf statement is where we called that. Next, we're going to execute the getTotalPayment method in our loan. We'll see that it jumps to that getTotal method, or getTotalPayment method, sorry, and performs the calculation. Remember, our getTotalPayment executes our getMonthlyPayment method. Make sure we have that updated. And then we return our total payment. Now, in our tester code, we're finally done. We're ready to print out that information. And so our printf statement does the appropriate formatting and prints out the information for us. So using the debugger can help you step through code so that you can find out how the code is working, first of all, and second of all, if you're having a problem, you can use the debugger to figure out where your problem lies. Is an if statement coming up with a result that you weren't expecting? You can check your variables window to see what's going on there. So remember that in Eclipse, the easiest way is to set the breakpoint and then start using the debug, saying debug as. And then you can specify how you want to debug this program. Now we are in the debug view, and if we want to return back to our normal Java view, I'm going to go ahead and stop executing our program, and then I can return to the Java view. Now once you've done some debugging, your debug view will stay available for you, this perspective in Eclipse, and you can switch back and forth if you like. I'm going to go ahead and turn off that breakpoint. And I want you to please use your debugger and experiment and see what kind of things you can see and how you can determine how your code is being executed. When we're working with classes and methods, things do a lot of jumping around back and forth, and it can be kind of confusing to figure out how everything's tied together. So hopefully from looking at the debugger, you can see that the loan, as our book is talking about, is an object, a complete object. For this loan, we want to know what the interest rate is, what the payoff amount is, the important things that we need to know about a loan. And then with our loan object, we included some calculations so that we could return information to users like the monthly payment and the total that the payoff amount would be. So we used the data that was passed to us to create the object to build other information that's available to our object users, our object consumers, so that we can give the consumer the information that they desire about the object that we're working with. So object-oriented programming can be a little bit overwhelming, so please use the debugger so that you can see what code is being executed when. Sometimes you might need to use it repeatedly to really understand what's going on. Please use the videos that come with your Reval content in your online book to walk through some different options. The next one I'm going to do is going to be using the debugger in NetBeans so that we can explore that a little bit also. Please, as always, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.